chairman of the Nigerian Electricity Summit Group. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor for me to have been invited to present this keynote speech in front of such a remarkable audience at the 2017 Nigerian Electricity Market Summit. The Nigerian energy sector is perhaps one of the most scrutinized energy sectors in the whole world, let alone sub-Saharan Africa. As one of the largest economies in Africa, Nigeria is a destination that attracts foreign investors who have a strong willingness to deploy capital in the local economy, and in particular in the energy sector. With our notable electricity deficiency, Nigeria presents a significant opportunity for power developers of the world to come and invest in our nation. Although we are blessed that Nigeria is a key investment destination on the continent, foreign institutions cannot be expected to solve Nigeria's electricity crisis. Our government has deployed significant resources to reform the Nigerian power sector and lay the foundation for the power market recovery. Indeed, the federal government has made commendable progress through its multi-pronged approach to reform, with targeted rehabilitative actions in the generation, transmission, distribution, and regulatory spaces, leading to tangible improvements that have been achieved in the sector. GenCos are currently supplying 4.8 gigawatts versus 3 gigawatts in early 2015, which equates to a 60% increase in power supply, partially due to FGN's progress in stabilizing the Niger Delta region, while actively supporting the development of greenfield gas and hydropower projects. TCN and NDPHC have achieved a 28% increase in transmission capacity from 5.3 gigawatts in 2015 to 6.8 gigawatts currently. The FGN has closely worked with the World Bank to develop and implement the Power Sector Recovery Program, which has shed light on the magnitude of challenges that face our energy sector. We have come to realize, however, that this roadmap, while expensive, is a necessity for our country to pursue a sustainable outcome. A reality of this roadmap is that tariff prices must increase to achieve a truly sustainable electricity sector in Nigeria. While tariff increases are not popular, we must understand the facts around what a tariff increase means for Nigeria. Would it harm the Nigerian population? And of greatest concern, our most vulnerable brothers and sisters. I believe that we can achieve non-tariff efficiencies to offset the impact of tariff increases. For example, increases in the number of connected customers and decreases in the DISCO's collection losses could fully counteract some tariff increase if timed and implemented properly. We likely all agree that the latter two solutions are preferable to immediate and substantial increases in tariff. However, I would like to dig deeper into what I call the trade tariff challenges. On one hand, the current end consumer tariffs are insufficient to compensate all sector participants for regulating, operating, and investing in power infrastructure. On the other hand, high collection losses result in a further reduction against required sectoral revenues. For the most part, the discos were privatized in a manner that resulted in the respective companies having insufficient funding for investment, thus resulting in the discos not achieving their goals of increasing the number of customers and installing smart meters to ensure adequate collections. Recently, the former chief executive of NERC, Mr. Amadi, complained about how privatization happened, and in particular how the discos have been unable to meet their obligations after privatization. And I was having a conversation with someone who read the story in the papers and said, well, why is he talking now? The truth was that he spoke at that time. I was in government, I was in the central bank. I was aware that NERC objected to some of the names that were buying the discos. In fact, Mr. Amadi came to me and wanted me to write to BPE and give the list of those people who wanted to buy discos who had problems with AMCON. I declined, first because I did not think the central bank should initiate that, and second because I had gotten myself into enough political trouble and I didn't want anyone to accuse me of trying to basically torpedo the privatization process. But if we are honest with ourselves, all of us in government knew that the people who were buying discos, well, I wouldn't say all, but we knew that most of the people who were buying discos did not have the financial muscle or the technical competence to deliver on what they said they would deliver on. And like everything else in Nigeria, 90% of our problems as a nation are always self-inflicted. There's nothing that's happening that was not foreseen or foreseeable. There's nothing that is happening that was totally unavoidable. We just did not do this properly. And even assuming we had made that mistake, what has stopped us from following up, making sure that the commitments that were given were complied with? And if those commitments were not complied with, what stops us from unraveling that process and bringing in people who can now do the correct thing? So, for most part, the discos that were privatized, in a manner that resulted in the respective companies having insufficient funding for investment, thus resulting in the discos not achieving their goals of increasing the number of customers and installing smart meters to ensure adequate collections. During the privatization, we heard all these comments. And just interesting, if you're in government, you hear people were saying, this is like telecoms, it's like MTN. Electricity is the next cash cow. We missed on telecoms, we missed on Airtel, we should get it, which is fine. In fact, it could be a cash cow. But how much did MTN pay for its license? $280 million? How much did MTN invest in infrastructure before it became a cash cow? The cash didn't just start coming out of nowhere. Now, people have bought discos. They expect to see cash without investing. How does that work? Now, these are very simple issues that, frankly, can be addressed with the right political will. So, consequently, the cumulative underinvestment of discos and the economic recession have had a compounded impact on MBET, which serves as a trader of power between gencos and discos, resulting in the current situation in which the government must secure substantial loans from the World Bank and other institutions to cover the gap MBET faces. By the way, full disclosure, I don't think I was invited here as a traditional ruler. I was invited as chairman of Black Rhino, which is the company. Okay, so I'm not speaking on behalf of the Emirate. And I'm not speaking on behalf of Black Rhino, but just so that it's noted that I also am involved in this case. So we must acknowledge that while necessary in the short term, loans from the World Bank and others are not a sustainable solution for our nation in the long term, if not accompanied by significant policy reforms. Look, and this is going to come up when I talk about transmission. In the 2017 federal budget, I don't know if you remember, when it first came out, the first thing that struck me, the first two numbers that struck me, were that the amount set aside by the federal government on debt service was higher than the entire non-oil revenue projected for the federal government. Okay, so the federal government, even on the basis of extremely optimistic non-oil revenue forecasts, would use 100% of its total non-oil revenue to service debt and still take something out of the oil revenue that was shrinking to complete debt service charges. Now, anyone who sees that can tell you that you were in a deep hole, and what you need to do is to stop digging. Any kind of model, any kind of structure, any kind of system that requires you to go and take on more debt should be avoided if it can be avoided. Now, if you have to borrow for education, if you have to borrow for healthcare, if you have to borrow for life-saving drugs, if you have to borrow because you have a natural disaster, we understand that. But if you are borrowing to invest in transmission, or generation, or gas supply, or anything else for which there is abundant capital in the world ready to come, then you should think again. Even if that is your blueprint, you need to ask yourself, if you're spending 60% of your revenue on debt service, how much more can you spend? There are some choices that are simply not open to you. And therefore, as we talk about power sector and the needs of the power sector, we also need to look at the balance sheet of the government. It's not about sustainability of the power sector alone. The federal government cannot make its own balance sheet unsustainable in order to sustain the power sector. But the government has a choice. If you insist you want to own transmission, if you insist you want to make the investments in transmission, if you insist you want to borrow to invest in transmission, then you have made that choice to add further stresses on your balance sheet. So we need to have this holistic picture, which is why I'm happy we talk about the Minister of Budget and Planning coming, as well as Minister of Power. Maybe we should have the Minister of Finance, and we've got to look at sustainability all the way from the balance sheet of the government to the sector itself, if we're looking long term. Now, I don't know if my slides are out there. I have a number of slides, but I would just like to show two of the best. Slide 4. Anybody managing this? No? Anyway, basically what the slide will show you is that MBET has struggled to pay Gencos more than 30% of their invoices in the last few months. And this has been a constant problem. Similarly, Discos have only paid MBET around 30% of the value of invoices from MBET. This situation cannot continue. Now, MBET cannot remain in such a precarious financial position, locked between its obligations to Gencos and underpayment by Discos. We do, of course, recognize that the Discos in turn have their own suite of challenges, including high collection losses discussed earlier. We must reform and support the sector to allow MPET to fully pay its GENCO invoices from its DISCO receipts, with sufficient funds remaining to compensate other sector participants and to support the ongoing development of our energy sector to meet our future needs as one of Africa's most prominent economies. You know, when you look at what you've got to pay for, you would be looking for all costs that a prudent operator would incur to maintain generation, transmission, and transmission activities. Okay, so that's the slide. As you can see, the top shows how much is being collected by GENCOs from MPET. In August, it was just 31% of their invoices. The next one tells you how much MPET is actually collecting from DISCOs. August, it was 30%. And you can see the gap. The DISCOs are paying MPET 30% only of what MPET is supposed to pay the GENCOs. So what happens? Who pays the 70%? It's an obligation on MPET. And every month it keeps increasing. Every month it keeps increasing. Okay? So, and that's a big problem. Now, we need to have, ideally, if it's your sustainability, a tariff that just covers all costs. Okay? You need to maintain generation, transmission, and distribution. All costs associated with sector reform. All costs associated with rapid investment in new generation, transmission, and distribution infrastructure. Costs associated with regulation and oversight. Costs associated with transitional market infrastructure. And for private sector participants, a return that attracts foreign direct investment to Nigeria relative to other investment destinations. Now, I am not saying that in calculating the tariff, every one of these costs has to be considered. You can take a political decision, for example, that the government will fund the cost of regulation. That's a decision you take. Okay? That's a decision you have taken. But economists always talk about the difference between economic costs and financial costs. You must understand that someone is paying for that cost. I must be deliberate. There's no point going into something and not knowing there are costs involved, and then later finding that you cannot sustain it. So if you know this is the cost of regulation and it's coming from the government's balance sheet, you plug that hole in calculating your tariff. Government will take care of ABC, the tariff will take care of ABC or DEF. Now, so we must reform and support the sector to allow MPET to fully pay its GENCO invoices from its DISCO receipts, with sufficient funds remaining to compensate other sector participants and to support ongoing development of our energy sector to meet our future needs as one of Africa's most promising economies. If we do not act now, MPET's gap will merely be bridged by our government through loans that will ultimately be repaid by our children and grandchildren. That is, if they pay at all. Would we not rather leave a legacy of an efficient and sustainable power sector? And this is, again, fundamental. And you cannot talk about power without talking about the macroeconomic policy. As a country, we have to take a decision. Do we make sacrifices now to reduce the debt overhang on this country? Or do we continue living this life of a bench, life of luxury, borrowing to finance our current lifestyle, and then leave our children and grandchildren to figure out how to pay the debt? These things are choices. You know, we want to avoid difficult decisions. We don't want to pay higher tariffs. We don't want to, at the same time, we want the investments in the power sector. We want to have more hours of electricity. We don't want to pay for electricity. Someone is borrowing to pay, and it is the government. Now, who is the government? Who's going to pay? It is money coming out of the education of our children. It's money coming out of the healthcare of our wives. You know, we worry that we have very high infant mortality rates, very high maternal mortality rates, very poor health outcomes, one of the highest numbers of children out of school. We worry that we don't have enough power. We worry that our roads and infrastructure are bad, but do we realize that so long as everything you earn goes to pay interest on debt, you're not going to fix these problems? We're not going to fix the problems. So we have to think, how do you have models that are sustainable so that government balance sheets can be freed up for development? Now, if we accept that we must walk the path to sustainability, let us examine what increasing electricity tariffs will mean for Nigeria. Can you go to the slide after the one you just showed? Slide 5. Yes, this slide. Assume you have a garment factory worker who uses a sewing machine for 12 hours a day. A simple sewing machine would use up to 2.4 kilowatt hours per day. So this is like 200 megawatts for 12 hours, okay? When grid power is available, the manufacturer pays around 28 naira per kilowatt hour, of course depending on where they're located. When grid power is not available, this worker uses a diesel generator costing as much as 127 naira per kilowatt hour. So you must consider the blended price of electricity that an average consumer may face. Depending on where the consumer is located, they may rely heavily on generators to go about their daily business, or may enjoy a grid connection sufficiently stable to only occasionally turn to generator power. As you can see on the graph, if your manufacturer obtains 10% of its power from a generator, they would achieve a net saving for any tariff increase up to 35%. Up to 35% tariff increase, you would still be better off than using the generator. And this is for someone who obtains 10%. In other words, where a tariff increase allows us to effectively cover the cost of producing that power, as well as the cost of investing in electricity infrastructure, consumers benefit from a lower blended cost of power despite the tariff increase. This is simple. If you pay 28 naira tariff and 127 naira for a generator, okay, as you increase the amount of electricity on the grid, you simply reduce your costs. And as you reduce your costs, there's room for actually paying a higher tariff and you'll still be better off. Plus, you know, all research that I have seen shows that at very low levels of income elasticity is far more important than price elasticity. For a poor man, give him expensive electricity that would allow him to earn a living. That is better than not giving him electricity because he has nothing. Without power, he does not have the opportunity. And look at China. And we should study not just Chinese GDP growth, but look at what are the buttons that China has pushed. From the days of Deng, China has monitored only 3 indices. Forget everything they say. Only 3 indices are important to the Chinese government. How many Chinese are employed? How many Chinese have access to electricity? And how many Chinese have a higher education? Those are the only 3 things that matter to the Chinese Communist Party. They've got a large population. Once they have electricity and they have jobs and they have an education, they have stability, they have growth, they have development. China started in 1974 with only 8 million graduates. 8 million. Today, China has over 300 million Chinese with university degrees and higher qualifications. There are more graduates in China than the entire US population. China is having electricity per capita that is approaching US levels. China started in 1974 with 700 million Chinese living in poverty. 700 million in the days of Deng. I know, my father was an ambassador to China. To get essential commodities, he had to go to Hong Kong. You couldn't get cornflakes in Beijing. He had to go to Hong Kong every 2 weeks to get basic food stuff. In 1974, 40 years, now you've moved from 700 million Chinese living in poverty to 30 million today. I mean, we talk about miracles, but why do we talk about an Asian miracle? Has anybody seen any angels come from heaven to do this work for them? And that's what you call a miracle, when you need angels and, you know, these are human beings with arms and legs and eyes and brains, and they've done it. So we have a choice, like I say, we can have these conferences. I noticed, I was very happy when this gentleman opened the prayer that nobody said amen, because in all the prayer, he didn't pray for MDET or for GEMCOs or for DISCOs or for the government making policy. He prayed for us to have a conversation. Yeah, we can have a successful conference, it's a nice talk shop. And then what happens after that? He doesn't deliver power. This summit will not deliver 1 megawatt of power. I thought he was going to pray for the people who are going to deliver electricity. So nobody said amen. I don't know if you said it, but I didn't, and I didn't hear anyone say it. So if we accept that, so this is really what is important. You can see this slide. You move from the right to the left, and you can increase your tariff so long as you increase the number of hours of power that they get. The guy is better off because he's saving a lot of money that he was spending on diesel. And I think this communication is very important because we are not communicating this enough. People just look at an increase in tariffs. They don't say, okay, right now you have 3 hours of power. What is the cost of the 21 hours? Even if you're not buying diesel, even if you don't have a generator, what is the price of darkness? How much are you paying for darkness? It has a price. What have you missed out? What have you missed out in terms of what you could do if you had light that you cannot do anymore? You can't work, you can't be a carpenter, you can't be a mechanic, you can't be a vulcanizer, as they say. You can't operate your sewing machine. You can't use your PC to learn. Your son cannot read and do homework. What is the cost of darkness? It's infinite. As they say, if you think education is expensive, what is the cost of illiteracy? You know, try ignorance. What is the cost of ignorance? It has a price. And similarly, darkness has a price. So it's also a problem of communication, of education, of enlightenment. Everybody has just become defensive. You know, we're not going to increase. I've heard, oh, we're not going to increase tariff. But I've read some of the comments recently from the ministries. Oh, we have no intention of increase. You have already prepared the minds of Nigerians to think that an increase in tariffs is a problem. What people need to say is that, look, these tariffs are unsustainable. But we are going to try to do it in a structured manner, take care of the weak and vulnerable, and make sure that these tariff increases are accompanied by improved efficiency. And they are at the barest minimum, because what we can fix by fixing collections, we fix collections. What we can fix by getting more customers on the grid, we get more customers on the grid. What we cannot fix, except by increasing tariffs, I'm sorry, we have to increase tariffs. We cannot continue borrowing to pay, because somebody is paying for this electricity. And this is the communication that we need to have. It is about, you must have difficult conversations with the population in order to maintain your own credibility and integrity. Otherwise, when you ultimately have to increase the tariff, they will say you lied to us. There's no point. These tariffs will go up. Maybe not today. Maybe not in an election year, I imagine. Yeah, I've been in government before. I know that the election cycle is always a problem. But they will go up. So it's clear that despite the commonly held belief that tariffs would have a negative impact on consumers, quite the opposite may be true. Small businesses without generators will be able to enjoy the benefits of a more efficient energy sector and achieve net savings through the production increases afforded by a reliable electricity supply. As such, I urge you, as esteemed participants in this most critical sector, to use this conference to carefully evaluate the merits of such a tariff increase. While many consumers will achieve long-term net savings despite tariff increases, I must stress our common responsibility to continue to protect the most vulnerable consumers through the use of lifeline tariffs. The poor rural woman, the poor rural worker, those living below poverty line, who are struggling to feed themselves, should not be denied of electricity because they cannot afford to pay. But frankly, in terms of total revenues, if you use the 80-20 rule, many of those do not contribute significantly. Everywhere you go, if you're in the banking industry, you know that. If you take your savings account customers and say how many of them have more than 1 million naira, they will be less than 20% of your customers, but they account for 80% of the value. You know, it's everywhere. So while they may be a very large number, in reality, their consumption levels are low. What they actually pay is low, and what you lose in terms of revenue is not significant. So you can afford to take care of the poor, but those who should be able to pay must pay. Now, moving beyond tariff sustainability, we must reiterate the necessity of achieving sector sustainability for our nation through non-tariff measures. Because again, that's another mistake. Everybody talks about tariffs, tariffs, tariffs. Tariffs are important, but there are also other non-tariff measures. The power sector must be developed holistically throughout its different pillars to overcome current and future challenges and support Nigeria's journey to becoming an increasingly global economic power. In the generation sector, Nigeria needs an energy sector framework that incentivizes efficient operators to invest in greenfield capacity. Additionally, we should continue to utilize our natural resources, gas and hydropower, for a sustainable and cost-effective domestic power generation. With regards to bulk trading, MBET's role in implementing power sector reforms cannot be overstated. MBET must continue to take the commercial lead to ensure that PPA tariffs are sustainable for the sector and strive to match its obligations to generation companies with its expected receipts from distribution companies. In transmission, TCN and NDPHC must continue their work in ensuring that the network is robust and well maintained to support the additional generation capacity that must be brought online. The scale of investment required to increase transmission capacity to meet Nigeria's future demand necessitates TCN's privatization to alleviate the burden on the government's balance sheet. This is important. Unless the government is ready to keep borrowing trillions and trillions of naira to invest, there is no option but to find one big operator with very deep pockets who can invest in the transmission network and fix it. 20 years, 25 years maybe, hand back to the federal government. But this 1 billion naira, 2 billion naira amount, it's not going to work. Certainly not for where we want to go. Already, as Dr. Usman has said, or I think it was Dr. Fatah, you have, I think we now have capacity for generating like 12,000 megawatts, and we can evacuate only half of it. Okay, so you know, you're going to build all this generating capacity. You need the capacity to evacuate it very quickly and get it to the end user. You may also want to reconsider this complete bridge between transmission and distribution. If you look at the Chinese model, State Grid, and I've said it's State Grid is the owner of the channel. It's the second largest state-owned enterprise in China. Actually, it's the largest. I think it's number 2 on Fortune 500. State Grid owns the transmission and distribution. Now, even if it doesn't own distribution, the transmission company should have a stake in distribution companies because you need a strong level of coordination. Right now, if you're a distributor, you can't even decide where power goes. So sometimes, you've got customers who are paying you, they don't have power. And other customers who do not pay get the power. You know, and you know, so even if you invest in the metering, even if you invest in the collection system, you need to have the ability to decide who gets power and when power gets cut off. So some level of coordination or synergy is important. So my sense is that we've got the Regulatory Act. It's a very good act, but it is not too early to look at what we can do to tinker with it and to amend it and to rethink some of its premises. Finally, discourse, the face of the power sector to our consumers. Distribution companies and the system operator should strive for greater collaboration to optimize energy allocation among the players in distribution. Discourse must seek to improve billing transparency, including the rollout of prepaid meters. And again, I keep, maybe because of my economics background, and this is why I always have run with accountants. Accountants will always give you the wrong advice when you look at these things. You know, look, your accountant, your financial controller will tell you that these meters are very expensive. And if you invest in the meters and the consumers cannot pay for these meters, then you take it a loss. The economist would say to you, without the meters, what are you collecting? Okay, so you've got to weigh. Okay, if I fund these meters, let's say I install these meters for free, or let's say I subsidize them, or let's say I put them in and spread their costs over 3, 4, 5 years, just add to the bill. I'm going to put a meter, it costs 70,000, but I don't want to pay 70,000 today. Okay, you're going to pay me 70,000 over 10 years. Okay, by how much would your revenues increase when you have those meters in place compared to when you didn't have them? Okay, so you guys, you need to employ more economists and fewer accountants. Every time I talk to people, they're talking about the cost of this. And they're not talking about the opportunity cost. And whether you're talking about the nation's balance sheet or talking about the investments in TCN or distribution, every single thing you do has to be thought of as an economic decision. Yes, it has a financial cost. But what is the cost of not doing it? I have not mentioned that. And what are the benefits? So you've got to weigh, and other people have done it, other economists have done it, put in those meters, some for free, some subsidized, some repaid over a long term, and they have seen the improvements in collection, which have then made it less necessary to have a sharp increase in tariffs. So politically, even for the government, to avoid a sharp increase in rates, you've got to work on these non-tariff efficiencies. You've got to work on number of customers on the grid, number of hours of electricity available. And I can tell you in Kano, and I'm very happy to say most people in Kano will tell you they're getting like 15 to 17 hours of power a day now. And this is, I mean, you actually have the experience of more hours of power. And this is a very good thing the government has done, but you need to go beyond tinkering and just move up to the next stage. So I can confidently say that Nigeria will be able to not only reform its energy sector, but also become a leading example in sub-Saharan Africa. If everybody in this room works closely and relentlessly to implement and maintain efficient and success-driven solutions that will rehabilitate and uplift the Nigerian power sector. We now have all of the pieces of the puzzle and must work to assemble them together. Thank you for your attention.